Going live. I'm live. Hello. Hopefully, somebody can see this. There is a bit of a delay on the preview, but there we are. This is my first time doing this on my own, so I apologize if there are any technical issues. I'm seeing there's at least one person watching, which is good. If you have access to the live chat, just type something in there just so I know that it's not just me talking to myself as I usually do. And make yourselves comfortable. I'm just going to wait a few minutes for a few more people to show up, and then I'll get started. So yeah, everything is looking good. Got two people. There we go. There we go. Hey, hi. Hello, hello. So the live chat is working, which is fantastic. All right. In case you don't know who I am, and you got this link from a friend, and you're like, who is this dude? I'm a science communicator. I work at the McGill Office for Science and Society. I have a podcast that I co-host with Dr. Christopher Labos called The Body of Evidence. This is the channel. Yes, you are the first one on here. So I co-host a podcast called The Body of Evidence. This is our YouTube channel. We've been doing the podcast for over 5 years now. And that's that. And my background is in molecular biology, and I'm very much interested in the spectrum between science and pseudoscience, and what is real science, what looks like science but that really isn't. And I'm particularly interested in alternative medicine, and that's why I wanted to do this. And it's going to be a fun little book review. I'm not revealing yet what the title of the book is. I will do so in a few minutes. And it's a very popular book. And I decided to do a little dive and read it and bring you guys back my questions. And hopefully we can go through this and learn from it, and become more critical readers, perhaps. So yes, you should be asleep, but here you are. You're in India. Well, that's pretty amazing. What time is it in India right now? This video, by the way, will be available on the channel as soon as the stream is over. The video will be available for anybody to watch. You can be able to send a link out to your friends and coworkers and family members. But thank you to everybody who could make it onto the stream. It would be awesome if Chris could join us. Yes, we don't have that capability at the moment. I don't believe that you can freely have people in two different places be on a stream at once. I think you have to pay for a license to do that. So we're not there yet. If we have a good feedback from this stream, it's something that we could do in the future when we're able to be in the same room together again. So we'll see about that. 4:30 a.m. Wow, that is dedication. Thank you very much. We've got 4 viewers. We've got more people coming in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I was just introducing myself. Most of you probably know me. And I was going to say we're going to start in a few minutes. I'll reveal what the book is. It's a very popular book, and I'm curious to see the reactions to it. I'm looking at the live chat now. I won't be looking at it very closely while I'm actually talking about the book. This is more, it's not so much of a Q&A type of live stream, but it's more of just me talking about the book. But feel free to leave comments there and chat amongst yourselves. That's perfectly fine. So if you can use a live chat, let me know who you are and where you're from. And it's a very strange thing to be live streaming on your own, because it feels like you're talking to yourself, and there's nobody there, and you want to fill the void, and it's not easy. I'm not used to hosting a 3-hour talk radio show. But people who do that are probably better at this than I am. So there we are. So basically, yeah, so I want to go through this book that I read. Now, there are a lot of skeptics out there and doctors and scientists who come down very hard on these books, and they will tweet about them or they will write reviews that are very aggressive and perhaps sound arrogant. And I think that it can turn off a lot of people. There are people who are curious about these things, about alternative medicine in general. And you know, I do want to reach out to them. I want to make sure that they find a space where they can hear some of these criticisms without feeling personally attacked. So that's why I wanted to do this stream tonight, which is to go through this book. I'm not going to demolish it. That is not the point at all. But I wrote down a bunch of notes as I was reading through it. And I'm hoping that those questions make sense to you, and that those are the kinds of questions that you may ask yourself when you are reading other books of this kind, because those are good questions to ask ourselves, because it's very easy to make a claim, right? It's very easy to make a claim in a book and say, well, I think this, or this is a truth, but we need to have evidence behind these claims. All right, so are you guys ready to know what the book is? I have the cover here. So I wanted to have a physical copy of the book, but unfortunately, because of the times that we're in, because of all of the the postal office is having a tough time delivering things, so I instead got an ebook version of it from the library. And I had never tried this before, so your public library might also have the same service. You might be able to get a book, an ebook, free of charge. Just get it on loan from them, and I'm using Overdrive here on my iPad. And this is it. This is the book. So here it is. Here's the book that I'll be reviewing tonight. And I'm going to switch over to my real-time video feed so I can see, because otherwise I've got the delay here. All right, so the book that I'll be talking about tonight is this one. Here it is. So Life-Changing Foods by the medical medium, also known as Anthony William. Very popular book. I don't know if this was a bestseller on the New York Times, but I know that his previous books have been. So I've got the book here. I've got my notes. And yeah, so let's talk about this. If you know nothing about Anthony William, that's perfectly fine. We'll go through that. And again, this guy's extremely popular. So let's open this book, right? So when you open the book, the first thing you see are the praises. There are a lot of people who have written praises for the book, and that includes people like Gwyneth Paltrow, like Naomi Campbell, Scott Bakula, Rashida Jones, Annabeth Gish, big names in Hollywood, right? And so that's the first thing to ask yourselves, like, who has written these praises for the book? And what do they know? Where are they coming from? Are they experts at this? Are they other doctors? In this case, they're celebrities. They're almost all celebrities here. That's something to keep in mind. There's a disclaimer on page 14, which I found very interesting. I'm going to read it out. It says, the author of this book does not dispense medical advice or other professional advice or prescribe the use of any technique as a form of diagnosis or treatment for any physical, emotional, or medical condition. The intent of the author is only to offer information of an anecdotal and general nature that may be part of your quest for emotional and spiritual well-being. In the event you or others use any of the information or other content in this book, the author and the publisher assume no responsibility for the direct or indirect consequences. The reader should consult his or her medical, health, or other professional before adopting any of the suggestions in this book or drawing inferences from it. So right off the bat, this is a pretty big disclaimer, right? So they're saying basically, I'm going to give you some health advice, but it's not medical advice. Don't sue me if you get harm from this, and talk to your doctor before you try any of these things. And this disclaimer, I see this a lot in alternative medical circles. There are legal reasons for that, but it should hopefully make you realize that, okay, like this is not medical advice, but it might sound like medical advice. But they're trying to get away scot-free from any consequences that might arise if you follow this advice. So that's always a little bit, I don't know. So let me skip forward to the introduction, because I also want to point out the stuff that I like about the book. I'm not just here to criticize it. I want to say that there are some good things about it. So in the introduction, he talks about the importance of being careful in life, of safety, talking about airbags and brakes on the car and all that, and that's very important. That we're always looking out for one another, sure. So he sees his book as being like the safety equivalent, but for our health. So that's perfectly fine. I do think that we do need to be careful, and this is, if he has information to help us be more careful with our health, hey, that's great. He says, even with everything we already know, there is so much more to know. And of course, I'm a scientist by training, and that's the core of science, right? So if we knew everything there was to know, we would stop doing science, right? So this idea that we don't know everything, that there's much more to know, really speaks to me. So I agree with that. We also need to think outside the box, because safety threats are not constrained by a box. Okay. Sure, I mean, sometimes we do have to think outside the box. So he says, fruits and vegetables, those are the big guns on how to protect yourself. And they are very important, and they are part of a very balanced diet. I mean, most dietitians you'll speak to will tell you, like, more fruits and vegetables in your diet. So he's all for that. I agree. That's great. He says it's not just about calcium for your bones. It's about eating. He says it's about eating. Where is this? So I wrote my notes with the Apple Pencil, and sometimes they're hard to read. But he says it's about eating figs in groups of 9 for maximum benefit. So that's the first thing that he wrote there, where I went, wait a second. So he's claiming that you need to eat figs in groups of 9. And that's how you get maximum benefit from eating figs. Okay. I don't know why. That sounds strange to me. But that's in the book. Okay. We're just in introduction now. Now he's asking, why are we seeing increased levels of anxiety, of colitis, of dementia? They've gone up. Why is that? And that's, of course, a very good question. We do have a lot of chronic diseases. And in part, it's because we live longer than we used to, right? So you're going to see some of these things that may take years and years, decades to develop. And now we come to the core of where he's getting his information from. And I want to read you this paragraph, because that is really what distinguishes Anthony William from other people. He says, this information, which comes from a source called Spirit, capital S, is very often ahead of science. So when you read in the pages to come that, for example, onions help alleviate bad breath, not cause it, you aren't likely to find a scientific study or healthcare expert who says the same thing, because no one knows this yet. Spirit understands that you don't have decades to wait for research to uncover these answers. Are you supposed to go another 20 years suffering with stomach pain, not knowing that celery juice is the most amazing digestive tonic? No, you need access to these insights now, so you can feel better and live your life. And then we're going to go through his sort of origin story, but that's the core of who the medical medium is. So he claims that there is a spirit that has knowledge from the future on what is healthy and what is not. And sometimes it goes against what we know now scientifically. Now, when I read this, the question that comes to my mind is, okay, well, how do we know this, right? How do we know that this guy is legit? Because, of course, there are a lot of charlatans out there. So how do we know that this is legit? And, of course, there's no way to prove that, right? This is an irrefutable claim. You can't show that it's wrong, because even if you say, Anthony, you say that onions alleviate bad breath, they don't cause it. Well, science is telling us right now that it causes bad breath. I mean, in fact, if you eat an onion, it's pretty immediate. You can smell it. But he's going to say, well, what you don't know is that in the future, that's reversed. We know that the opposite is true. So and I'm not being cynical here, but I mean, just to say that when you're reading this, you should think to yourself, well, that's awfully clever, right? Because there's no way to prove him wrong, because he says he's getting his information from the future. So Anyway, he says that blueberries are the resurrection food, capable of bringing us back to life when it seems like all is lost. And there's going to be a lot of this kind of language in the book, of which I'm, appropriately skeptical. Then he goes through his origin story, right? So how did he come upon this knowledge? So he says that when he was 4 years old, this spirit called Spirit of the Most High came to him and told him that his grandma had lung cancer. And then they sent their grandma for testing, and medical testing confirmed it that she had lung cancer. So he says that he can perform MRI scans with his eyes. That's what he claims in the book. Now, if this is true, it would be a simple test to perform, right? Like, imagine if I claimed that I had the same imaging capability with my eyes that a magnetic resonance imaging scanner has. I'm sure doctors everywhere would love to test that, right? Because if I can do that, I would be a live MRI machine. I would get a job like this, right? And it would be a very, very easy way to test this, because you would take patients who had MRIs, and then you would have me look at them, and I would pose my diagnosis. I would say, I can see this, I can see this, I can see that. And then we would compare what I would say to what the MRI machine had said. And then we would know if I truly have MRI vision. Now, of course, he has not submitted himself to this process, which is interesting. He also says on page 29 here, you won't find citations or mentions of scientific studies in this book because everything I've written in these pages comes from spirit. All right, so that's the other thing, because, in books like that, you would typically have a very thick bibliography. And you would be able to go back to these papers and see if the papers do support what the author is making them say, essentially. But now he's saying, I won't have any references in my book, right? Because I'm getting all this information from the future, from spirit. So again, you can't falsify that, right? Okay, so now we go to page 30. Yeah, so he gives voice to the fact that people with chronic conditions are very frustrated because medical science doesn't have all the answers, and that is so true, right? There are so many conditions for which medicine right now may not even know what the cause is, may not have any good treatments, especially chronic conditions, or the treatments that exist, they have side effects. So that's a very common complaint from people who have these conditions, who may be dissatisfied with medicine because medicine doesn't have all the answers right now. And so, but this guy says that he's got answers. Of course, that's very appealing, right? And that's something that you see in almost every book on alternative medicine, is this idea that, if you're dissatisfied with medicine, come over to my side of the fence because I've got the answers. But do they? Do they have the answers? Are they good answers? We don't know. He says that you are not to blame for your health problems. It's not negative thinking. And that is very interesting, because a lot of alternative healers will indeed blame the person. They will say, well, all you need to do, for example, is to think positively or pray your disease away, which implies that if you're not getting any better, it's your fault. Right? You're the one, you're not doing this correctly. Now, he is going against that grain, which is good. He says you are not to blame for your health problems. It's not negative thinking. I agree with that. He says you have the right to be free of pain. Sure. Pain is not fun. And then toward the end of the introduction, he says there's so much noise out there. There are so many contradictions, mixed messages, fads. It's impossible to know what to trust. And that is so true. I'm making a career out of this. There is a lot of noise out there. And I often get asked a question like, whom do I trust? There's just so much noise. I agree. Now, the question is he bringing good answers to the table, or is he just bringing more noise? We don't know. Why should we trust the spirit that talks to him very conveniently from the future? Okay, so that was the introduction. So far, not too bad. I do question spirit, but here we are. So now we're in part 1, which is called Rising Out of the Ashes. And there's a nice little that's the book here. There's a nice little illustration, very calming, very nice. So that's part 1, Rising Out of the Ashes. So what does he talk about? He talks about how to save ourselves. He says, He lists a number of chronic health conditions. He says there's an epidemic of a mystery illness. And it's true that there are conditions for which doctors just don't have a good diagnosis. Just like we don't know. We don't know what it is you have. You have a syndrome. A syndrome is basically a collection of symptoms where there's no known cause at the beginning anyway. So that's very frustrating, right? Because the brain abhors a vacuum. We don't like an absence of explanations. Okay. Oh yeah, he says. Oh yeah, he makes this weird observation that in nursing homes, there are now fewer people in their 90s and in their hundreds than there were 30 years ago. But there's no reference for that. And I doubt that this is true because we do have an older population now than we've ever had before. So that doesn't make sense to me. He says the lifespan is falling, not rising, which is not true. It's demonstrably not true. He says longer life does not necessarily mean a healthier life. That is true. I agree with that. So then he predicts on page 43, he predicts that in 30 years, every woman born will be practically guaranteed to develop breast cancer. Now, again, this is a tall claim, but this is a prediction for the future. So, I mean, we don't know. I doubt that that's true. I mean, given all the data that we have, I doubt that this is true, but this is what he boldly claims. And now, here we get into like the core thesis of this book of his. So he talks about the unforgiving four. What are those? So these are the four things that we should be blaming for all of our ills. The first one is radiation. Second one is toxic heavy metals. The third one is a viral explosion. And the fourth one is DDT. Okay. So. He says, okay. So when I was a PhD student, I was in human genetics. So I'm quite familiar with genetics as a whole. And he is claiming that there are diseases that run in families, and it looks like they are inherited. But he says, aha, they are not inherited. He says it's because radiation, toxic heavy metals, viral explosion, and DDT, the unforgiving four, they are transmitted through the bloodline. Okay, so he is claiming that essentially genetics doesn't exist, like mutations that cause diseases, which is like a well-established fact, that those things don't exist. But that what is being passed down, though, is not the thing for which we have a mechanism and we know how mutations in the DNA, how they get transmitted from generation. No, that's not happening. What is being transmitted, though, is radiation. Somehow, if your mom was irradiated, the radiation itself gets transmitted to you. And the heavy metals, same thing. And the viruses, same thing. And DDT, same thing. So I have a tough time swallowing that. So he said genetic dysfunction is not real. And autoimmune diseases are not the body attacking itself. I mean, that is literally what it is. An autoimmune disease is your immune system mistakenly thinks of part of yourself as being non-self. But he says, no, that's not what this is. He also says that toxic heavy metals are a favorite food of viruses, but you can detox from them. And then he goes into radiation. Okay, so he goes through each one of them one by one. He says, while we ignore radiation, we're breathing radioactive air from nuclear disasters from the past. And the radiation is also in the water and in the soil. And he says it's a trigger for every illness. That radiation is. That's what he says. Then he says toxic heavy metals have been linked to ADHD, to autism, to Alzheimer's disease, infertility, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, Parkinson's disease, depression, anxiety, cancer, seizures, etc. Right, so basically everything that they build up in the body, that they are falling out of the sky in vapors, and that mercury can stick around in a bloodline for millennia, and they amplify with each generation. How, again, he claims this is knowledge from the future, right? As far as we know, there's no mechanism by which this could be happening. And how would it amplify with each generation? How would this work? Where is the mercury? And how do you get it in all of your cells? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Then he talks about the viral explosion, which is one of these four things. He says that 98% of cancers are caused by viruses, and in combination with at least one other unforgiving four factors. He mentions viruses, quote, with unknown mutations. So earlier he said that mutations aren't a thing. These diseases are not transmitted via mutation. That's just false. But here he's saying, oh yeah, no, mutations do happen in viruses. So viruses can mutate, but we can't. I don't understand how that's supposed to work. He says frozen shoulder is caused by a virus. I've had frozen shoulder. Again, I completely disagree with him on this, but that's his claim. He talks about EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. He talks about the Epstein-Barr virus a lot on his radio show. He says that it leaves the blood and it hides an organ, so it can't be detected. But of course, spirit can see it, right? He also talks about human herpes viruses and their family, and doctors say there are 8 strains. He says, no, actually it goes up to and past HHV12. So I found that as very interesting in his book. So here's a guy, so he claims that he got a spirit from the future. He can, talk to him about what we know in the future. But the spirit from the future does not tell him the exact number of herpes viruses. He says it goes up to and past 12. Well, how many are there? Like, shouldn't spirit know? Apparently a spirit doesn't know. Okay. And then he talks about DDT, which he says has been banned for over 40 years, but it remains in the environment and in the food supply, and it is passed down from generation to generation. And other countries spray it. It goes inside the air, and talks about continental drift. Anyway, so that's what he has to say about those the 4 things that he thinks are the cause of every disease. Then he talks about adrenaline. So he says that all of these 4 things, they push our bodies to release adrenaline. Now, if that's the case, even though this is, information from the future, shouldn't medical doctors be able to measure these increased levels in adrenaline in patients, right? I mean, that's something that is measurable now. But if doctors are not seeing that, then how can he claim that that's what's happening? So he says we have this perpetual stress in our lives now, and that is true. Our lives tend to be very, very stressful. So I agree with him on that. And then he says, further along, he says there are other things to worry about. There's diminishing sunlight. He says we don't have the sunlight we once did because pollution and chemicals, they fill the sky, and it's disrupting plant life. He also says science doesn't know, but our bodies perform a type of photosynthesis. Again, bold claim, but science doesn't know. So we don't know. We can't check that, right? He talks about water deficiency, that the rain and the snow is now deficient in nutrients, that there used to be nutrients in the rain, but now those nutrients are gone. He talks about a true food crisis, not a shortage, but he says that the foods that we eat they're not as healthy as they used to be, and that's something it's a trope that I hear a lot in alt-med circles and people who are all about like natural healing and all those kinds of things. He says that canola oil causes inflammation. Well, if it did, we should be able to measure it even now in the present, right? He says, and now we move into another part of that section where he says, technology development is very fast now, but innovation has left some gaps. Sure, okay. He says that stress is not an adversary. So we talked about the fact that we're now like addicted to adrenaline and it's bad for us, but now he's saying, no, actually stress is not an adversary, which sounds contradictory. Okay. He says that stress is trying to talk to you, and he wants us to welcome stress to your table. And I'm not sure that I really understood what he meant by that. Then he says the foods you will read about soon, because there's a whole section on foods, are masters of adaptation. Surviving out there in the elements has granted them cell-deep knowledge of how to thrive in difficult circumstances, and this adaptability becomes a part of you when you eat them. So this is the concept of adaptogens. So it's this idea that there are certain foods that are very good at adapting to their environment, and so by eating them, you gain this ability to adapt to your environment, which I think is a claim that we should be a little bit skeptical of. But we'll come back to that. So okay, so we saw the unforgiving four, right? But now he talks about the holy four. So now we've got the four bad guys over here, and now we've got the four good guys over here. And so what are the holy four? He says it's fruits, vegetables, herbs and spices, and wild foods, and that they can detoxify the unforgiving four. Now, again, as I said before, fruits and vegetables, I'm all for them. They're amazing. They're great for our health. Herbs and spices, I mean, sure, they're good. Wild foods, we'll come back to that. So he claims that the food pyramid no longer applies. Okay, again, bold claim. We have to turn our understanding of nutrition on its head. He says it will be decades before that chart gets it right. Again, this is not a falsifiable claim. We just don't know. We don't know, right? He says that while blueberries hold thousands of years of healing wisdom, that adaptability is part of their DNA. Now, again, it's very interesting because I don't understand how he thinks of DNA, right? Because in some cases, DNA is part of your adaptation. Viruses can mutate, but your DNA can't mutate, or if it does, it can't cause diseases that are known to be caused by mutations in certain genes. So I don't think that his understanding of genetics is consistent throughout, and so I would flag that, and I would ask myself a lot of questions when I'm reading this. He says, look no further for an answer, antidote, or silver bullet. This is the key. And I mean, big red flag here. When you're reading a book that says, I have all the answer, I have the silver bullet, be very, very skeptical of that, because odds are they don't. There are rarely any silver bullets in life. If this guy thinks he's got it, he might not. Okay, so he says the holy four, they absorb sunlight, they concentrate it, and they pass it along to us when we eat them. Well, I mean, they do photosynthesis, and that's useful in terms of producing oxygen and storing sugar, but I don't think that's what he means by that. I think he literally means that the sunlight gets passed on to us when we eat food. And again, that's unscientific. That's just not how this works, as far as we know now. Of course, spirit knows different. Our cells absorb the light, and then it radiates through our bodies and our brains. And the holy four can also bring dead water back to life, whatever, again, dead water is. Okay, so very, I mean, you know, when you're reading this, it's a lot of this is very simplistic concepts, right? It's this idea that there are four bad things over here, there are four good things over there, and like they're fighting each other, and it's very appealing, right? It's very appealing to have kind of this like simple narrative about health, but it doesn't mean that it's true. Where are we? Yes. Okay. So each life-changing food heals specific metaphysical ailments. Oh yeah. So that's the thing. So his food items, they don't just detoxify us physically, but they're also like they're all associated with a specific psychological condition, which is again a big claim. So he says that some of these foods can prime us to find friends. They can cultivate our self-worth. They can give us hope. Oh yeah, so then he talks about water, right? And he says that plant foods have two different types of water. And again, he says science doesn't know this yet. You just have to trust me. He says there is hydrobioactive water, which supports physical health. And there is what he calls cofactor water, which is for the soul, for the spirit, for the emotions. And he talks about an apple and the cells inside of an apple, and how the cell walls of the apple keeps those two types of water separate. And that cofactor water contains minerals and enzymes that feed you spiritually. Um, Again, this makes no sense to me. But again, this is irrefutable information, right? So if you believe what he's saying, that he's getting this information from the future, then he can sell you anything, right? Because there's no way to check that unless you have a time machine. Cofactor water says it contains minerals and enzymes. Yeah, I said that. As kale grows, it intuits what your illness is and develops the right nutrients to heal you. So that's another claim that he makes, that if you are cultivating your own food, if it grows next to you, it can know what your illness is and it can develop the right nutrients to heal you, which I think again is a very it's a very seductive thing to say, right? This idea that plants are alive to the point where they can deduce what illness you have and they will produce the treatment that you need. So when you eat them, you can cure yourself of what other thing that you have. It's very, very seductive. Again, not at all how science has it now, but who knows? Maybe we're wrong, right? So then he says, so that's why. So you have to grow your own food, because if you get food from the farm, it will have the farm workers' energy inside of it and their illness, and will have produced nutrients that are not tailored to you. So then what do you do if you have to buy food from the farm? Well, you can run your hands over your produce and you can talk to your produce before you consume it. And I will just leave it there. All right, so now we are entering where we are. There we go. Just going through quickly some of those pages because it becomes a bit redundant. There we are. So now we are in part 2. There's another little pretty picture. The Holy Four. Part 2. All right, I'm just checking the... So we've got 13 people. Well, I expected 10, to be honest. So 13 is an improvement. This is higher than my expectations. All right, so I'm just going to drink a little bit of water. I hope you guys are enjoying this. This is fun. Okay. So, part 2, the Holy Four. What does he say? He says, so when it comes to food, yes, I'm just reading Meyer's comment here. Yeah, that's pretty much what he's claiming. All right, so I'm on page 107 now. He says that color matters, but it's not the full story. He talks about autoimmune disorders also, and he says it's a misnomer, as he said, because he says it puts the blame on you. Well, no, I mean, you're not in charge of your immune system, right? So if your immune system malfunctions, it's not your fault. So he says that autoimmune diseases are actually attacking pathogens, so bad things for you. You just don't know about it. You just don't know what the pathogen is. Okay, so now we enter, so this is the core of the book. And the way that the book works, so we went through this whole introduction about his theory and all that. So the way that the book works is that he'll mention like a fruit, like this is apple, obviously, and he will tell us what spirit told him about that particular food item. And then he will usually give conditions for which it works, symptoms that it can improve, what it's for in terms of emotional support, what the spiritual lesson is from this fruit, some kinds of tips, and then there's usually a recipe for using that. And I have not tried the recipes. If you want to treat this as a recipe book, hey, go ahead. Some of these recipes might actually be really, really good. Some of them look quite yummy. But so that's what he does. So I chose one. I didn't want to read through all of them because they're all it's all pretty much the same thing. So the one that I chose is the banana. There's a banana. All right. So banana. So he says bananas have gotten a bad rap lately. That they're blamed for being too high in sugar. I haven't read anything about that. I haven't read anybody complaining that bananas are too high in sugar. Banana is not it's not the fruit that I think of when I think of a sweet fruit. Grapes are high in sugar, but bananas, okay. He says the reality is they're full of, they have fiber, they have water, it's true. They have all kinds of minerals like manganese, selenium, copper, boron, molybdenum, okay, potassium, of course. Cool, all right, I'm with him so far, it's fine. He says bananas are a powerful antiviral food. Okay, they have the here we go. So he says they have the quote, they have the capacity to repel growth of the retrovirus HIV. That is a bold claim, right? So it would be one thing to say, right? Let's say that's not what he's saying, but let's say that he were to say, in cell culture, scientists have observed that the potassium found in bananas can actually kill cells infected with the HIV virus in high enough doses. So that would be one thing to say, right? It would be one thing to say that, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying that bananas are powerful. They are a powerful antiviral food, so powerful that they have the capacity to repel growth of HIV. Now, look, again, this is something that can be tested. If we give bananas to a bunch of people who are HIV positive, will their will their viral load go down significantly? I doubt that it's that easy, but that is the claim that he's making in his book. And there's a lot of that. Like every food has some kind of like miraculous disease-curing property, and this should trigger a little alarm bell in our brain. He lists a large number of conditions that can benefit from eating bananas. It's not just HIV. And let me read it to you, right? So he says, if you have any of the following conditions, try bringing bananas into your life. It's a long list. Colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, autoimmune disease, which is not one thing, it's a category of things. Heart disease, big category there. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, adrenal fatigue, Alzheimer's disease, bipolar disorder, diabetes, carpal tunnel syndrome, depression, diverticulitis, gallbladder disease, hemorrhoids, HIV, infertility, Parkinson's disease, arthritis, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, low reproductive system battery. Not sure that's a proper diagnosis. Sleep disorders, PTSD, fungal infections, shingles, tendinitis, anxiety, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, and edema. Now, again, if it sounds too good to be true, COVID-19. No, it's not, because the book came out before COVID-19. Otherwise, maybe it would be in the list. Who knows? Now, if it sounds too good to be true, you have to remember it probably is. This is a very, very long list of claims, and these claims can be tested, right? If you're sure about this thing, you can try this. You can have a bunch of people, you just give them bananas and see if it has any effect on their PTSD, on their fungal infection, right? You would need a control group, of course, that's not eating bananas. All right, and then there are symptoms. That's not all. So these are the conditions for which bananas are helpful. But then there are just symptoms also for which bananas can be helpful. Loss of taste and or smell. That's COVID-19, right? Weight gain, weight loss, temporomandibular joint issues, enlarged spleen, blurred vision, fatigue, candida overgrowth, diabetic neuropathy. Well, that's not a symptom. Bruising, tachycardia, constipation, bloating, diarrhea, headache, apnea, blurry eyes, blood sugar. It just goes on. And Bell's palsy. Huge list of symptoms there. And then there's emotional support, because he says that bananas encourage us to peel back our false shields and expose our true selves. I doubt that. He says that 3 or more bananas per day can help reduce PTSD. Again, I mean, I have to ask myself, like, how dangerous can this be, right? If somebody has PTSD and they read this and they think that this is really going to help, and let's say that they don't go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I mean, that can have real harm. These are very, very bold claims, and I have a tough time, believing them. All right, so then we go into so this whole section there is about all of these different food items. So I'm going to skip the rest and go to part 3, which is called Arming Yourself with the Truth. And he says that some people are struggling with fertility, and that is true. Infertility is a big issue. In fact, anybody who's watching this, the next episode of The Body of Evidence will be on infertility. So if you're not a listener of the podcast, just open up your podcast app when you're done with the stream and just type in The Body of Evidence. We just released an episode on HIV, and the one in a month or so will be on infertility. So he says, yeah, some people struggle with this. It's true. It is a source of frustration, as he says, confusion, disappointment, self-blame, despair. All of these, I completely agree. He nails it. But he blames infertility on stress, on pollutants, and on pathogens. Oh, yeah. So he will teach us how a woman's reproductive system operates, ways that are still unknown to science. Okay. He says that 40 years from now, 50% of women of childbearing age will be unable to have a baby. Again, we don't know, right? He has access to the future and we don't. He says low battery. If you have a low battery in your body, your reproductive system needs attention. Now, again, it's a very simplistic thing. I mean, again, we see this a lot in the alternative health sphere, giving you very simplistic explanations for how your body works. But it's a battery, and if when your battery is low, then bad things happen. It's a bit more complicated than that. He talks about so there are exercises that you can do to replenish your battery and thus become more fertile. He says, imagine plugging a cord into your reproductive system to charge it. So he wants us to do like mental exercises, like mental visualizations of imagining ourselves plugging a cord into our reproductive system to charge it. He says that this will help charge our reproductive system, which I have a tough time believing. But that's what he says. That's for women, though. So men don't do that. But for women, imagine yourself plugging the cord into your thing. For men, he says the reason why men are less fertile than we used to be is because of mercury levels. And the treatment that he has for us is Hawaiian spirulina, blueberries, cilantro, and a bunch of other things, which again sounds like a little too simple, right? I mean, if it were that simple, I think we have figured it out. He says some foods are anti-fertility. So they are anti-fertility. Okay. So he says animal food is full of adrenaline. And yeah, because the animals have a lot of stress before slaughter. And he says, yeah, I'm just gonna skip that section here. Next, he gets into, so we're still in for the reproductive system, but then he says now there are some harmful health fads and health trends that are around, and that I found quite interesting, because usually people who are in that sphere, they tend not to criticize each other, right? Because when you read a bunch of these books, you will realize that they're all contradicting each other, right? Because this person says you have to do that, and that person says no, you have to do the opposite. For some, it's like it's low sugar, high fat. Others, it's low fat, high sugar, but they don't typically criticize each other. But here he has a whole chapter on harmful health fads and trends, which I thought was quite interesting. He says that some fads are like invasive weeds, and I agree. So he says that this whole acidity, alkalinity thing, that's BS. That's not true. So the idea that, let's say that your body is too acid and that's what's causing the disease and you have to make it more alkaline, that is not true. And I agree with him on this. It's not true. We have buffer systems in our body, so that our pH does not go out of balance. And you can't change the pH of your body just by eating a little bit more alkaline. That's just not how it works. So he agrees with me on this. That's not true. He says that vitamin D mega doses, that's just a fad. It's not true. And it's true that there's a lot of hype over vitamin D. If you have enough vitamin D, you're fine. Mega doses, not going to do anything. He talks about B12 shots, which is interesting. So he says B12 shots, that's a fad, and it is. But he says, but it's because the shots don't have the right variety of B12. Okay, not sure I agree with him on that. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of this food stuff, I am moving to page 455. It's a thick book. It doesn't look like it because it's on the iPad, and my iPad does not change thickness. But it's got 549 pages, so we're toward the end now. But there's a section that I thought was quite interesting. And the page, oh, there we are. Okay. So one of the last chapters in his book is called Life-Changing Angels. And again, I'm going to tread very lightly. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of the stuff he does or claims to anyway. His spirit is possibly an angel. It's not clear. It's a spirit with a capital S. And now he's devoting a whole chapter to life-changing angels. So I just want to raise like some of the questions that I had. I only have 2 pages left of notes. I'll read the first paragraph of this chapter. So he says, in the world we cannot see with our eyes, the spiritual world where angelic forces reside, there is a complete understanding of the quickening that we're experiencing here on earth. God's angels are alert to our need to adapt with the changing times in order to survive and thrive here. In fact, there's a special group of angels called the life-changing angels whose mission is to support us through this time. They see you. They work hard for you. They know how much you deserve to ride the wave of life today, not get swallowed by it. So he claims that these angels support us via our food supply, which I thought was very interesting because earlier in the book, he claims that our food supply is really impoverished. So my question is, if they are looking out for us and they're supporting us through our food supply, how come they have allowed our food supply to be impoverished? He doesn't mention why. He also says that these angels are working to disarm GMO food production. That's interesting. So first of all, if these are angels, I mean, they're super powerful beings, right? So how come they weren't able to prevent GMOs from happening in the first place? And they haven't been very good at sort of disarming GMO food production because we have genetically engineered food. I mean, it's out there. We can buy it. Obviously, there's been some pushback, wrongfully, in my view, in some parts of the world, but I mean, if there are all-powerful angels behind this, they're not doing a very good job. He says they are concerned about the declining bee population. Okay, well, it's nice that these angels are concerned, but again, if they are super powerful spiritual being, how come they can't intervene and just make more bees or prevent whatever it is that is leading to declining bee population? They're not doing anything. Okay. He mentions one angel in particular. So he names 12 life-changing angels. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's the angel of abundance, the angel of enrichment, the angel of harmony, of synchronicity. There's the angel of provision, which I thought was very interesting. So her job, he says, is to route food to people who are undernourished or starving. Is she doing that? I don't know. There are a lot of starving people out there. Where is this angel of provision? Where is she? Not doing her job. We could use more food. People in Africa could use more food, and a bunch of different countries. Even here, there are poor people who need food. What should they do? Just pray to the angel of provision, and when she hears her name being called out, she will have food magically appear. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. All right. So he just goes through the angels and the angels and the angels. And then we reach the afterword. He says, compassion is key. I agree. Compassion is a good thing to have in life. It's not always easy, but it's very good. Then there's a very, very long index, which, of course, I will skip. And then we get to the acknowledgments. And some of the people that he lists in his acknowledgments for their kindness, their generosity, and their friendships. Just in case you have the same opinion of the book that I have, just in case you want to know who this guy is friends with, because you will recognize these names, he lists Robert De Niro, Naomi Campbell, Uma Thurman, Morgan Fairchild, and Demi Moore. So here we are. We're an hour into it. There we go. My battery on my laptop is still alive and kicking. So that's the book. That is the book. We went through the book. I'm very happy. In case you are joining us halfway through the stream, this is the book that I was reviewing. There we go. Life-Changing Foods by the medical medium, better known, or at least his real name is Anthony William. So I just went through the book, I read it, and these were my impressions. So there we are. I mean, I hope. I did not want to demolish the book. That's not the purpose of this. I think that it's important that we reach out to people who believe in these things, who have read these kinds of books, who derive a lot of ideas and reassurance from books like this, because we don't always do a great job of reaching across the aisle, so to speak. And it's easy for somebody like me who has a scientific background to dismiss a book like this. But what I really wanted to show is sort of how to read a book like this more critically, because there are tons of people out there who are making all sorts of claims, and they have books to sell, and they have other things to sell as well, and they can't all be right. Right? Like if we take all of these health books that are available out there, they literally cannot all be right. Even if we just take alternative medicine in general, like the well-established interventions like acupuncture, like chiropractic, like homeopathy, they can't all be right? Because they all have this one explanation for every disease, and they all have this one treatment for every disease. And so they're all like mutually exclusive. And all of these books, many of them, they're all mutually exclusive. And so if we are going to try and figure out what is true from what is false, I mean, it's for sure, a lot of it has to be false. Then we have to be more critical when we read these things. And we just can't take everything at face value. We do have to ask ourselves questions, see if there are contradictions in the book, like this whole mutation thing. Diseases are not caused by mutation, but viruses, they do mutate, and that gives them advantages. Well, how can you reconcile these two ideas? So you have to put your thinking cap on when you're reading one of these books, and you have to look at who is endorsing these books, right? So, when you list a whole bunch of celebrities like this, it does give a certain cachet to the book. But these celebrities are not medical doctors; they're not scientists, and so can we trust their judgment? And a lot of these books are sold off of testimonials, right? People who will say, well, I tried this and it made me feel better. But testimonials are not very reliable because you don't know what else they were doing. You don't know what other treatments they were taking. You don't know if that's just a natural course of their illness, that they were going to get better anyway, because a lot of these illnesses, they don't last forever, or some of them, the symptoms, they fluctuate over time. So anecdotes are just not a great way of figuring out what is true or not. So that was it. So that was Life-Changing Foods by the medical medium. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's see how many people are still in the stream. 12 people. That's pretty good. So I'm gonna stop in a few minutes. Thank you very much for sticking around. If you enjoy this, and if you want me to do another one of these with a different book, maybe you have a suggestion for a book, you can leave your thoughts in the live chat. You can also message us at the Body of Evidence. We have a Facebook page. We're on Instagram. We have Twitter accounts. And I'll just finish with a plug for the podcast. So I co-host a podcast called The Body of Evidence with Dr. Christopher Labos. We've been doing it for over 5 years, and we look at health claims. We look at things like COVID-19, like HIV, like infertility, like omega-3s, and we do a deep dive into what the best available evidence says about these things. And we do it, and we have a lot of fun, and we have skits, and we have jingles, and we have false fake ads on the show. We also do these long form interviews once a month. We'll be recording one very soon. I'm very, very happy to be chatting with this person. And so if you are interested in this kind of content, just check out The Body of Evidence. Our URL is bodyofevidence.ca. And the podcast is available on most podcasting apps. And that's basically it. If this stream was useful to you, if you think, if you know a coworker, or you know a relative, or you know a friend who is into these kinds of books, and you want to bring them a different perspective on them, I hope that you can share this video with them, and hopefully they will find it interesting and educational. So on that note, have a good night, and I'll see you around on the interwebs. Good night. And bye.